The 1876 April Uprising in Bulgaria. Levski had believed that it was hopeless to dream of foreign sponsorship or assistance. Bulgaria's liberation, he insisted, could be achieved only by the Bulgarians themselves. That did not turn out to be the case. In 1875 the Balkan Peninsula was thrown into turmoil by a rebellion, sparked primarily by social discontent, in Bosnia. The tensions could not be contained, and in the following year Serbia went to war with the Ottoman Empire. These events were followed with mounting excitement by the Bulgarian intelligentsia, and the revolutionaries believed this was their chance, the more so after Prince Milan of Serbia promised them 2,000 rifles. Atanas Uzuzov, whom the Bulgarian Revolutionary Central Committee, BRCC, founded in 1869 in Bucharest, had nominated to succeed Levski, wrote to Hristo Botev. I can only say that Bulgaria is dissatisfied, that it is in a terrible condition, that it is ready to take up arms to decide between life and death. I can assure you that in our homeland there is not a single Bulgarian who is not thinking of the fate of the Bulgarian nation, and of its political liberation. Even the government officials and the Chorbaji who at the moment are carrying out their loathsome obligations are not that loyal to the authorities. I can assure you that the majority of these Turkish officials and the Chorbaji are members of the revolutionary committees. Other reports came in of a willingness and preparedness for an armed uprising. The apostle in Stara Zagora wrote to the BRCC in August 1875 that everyone is buying arms and supplies. There were also attempts at action. There was a wild scheme to set fire to Constantinople and, more seriously, the BRCC in Bucharest attempted to stage an insurrection in the autumn in the Stara Zagora region. Despite the defeat of the attempted rising, the Russian consul in Rusay reported in October that, "It seems to me that the time is not far off when the whole of Bulgaria will rise up," and Nikolai Bretonov wrote that despite the failure in Stara Zagora, whatever happens we won't leave Turkey in peace. Either we shall all perish, or we shall free Bulgaria. Enthusiasm was clearly in the ascendant, and the Bulgarian lands had already been divided by the BRCC in Bucharest into 4 revolutionary districts based on Turnovo, Sleven, Vratsa, and Panagurishti, and a number of apostles and deputy apostles had been nominated. Furthermore, arms had been purchased with money donated by wealthy Bulgarians such as Evlugi Georgiev. Leaders of the 4th Revolutionary District met in Aborisht near Panagurishti in April 1876, and agreed to declare an uprising against the Ottomans in May. Tragically, the authorities discovered what was afoot and sent a regiment to the town on the 19th of April. Following a pre-arranged agreement of what to do in such circumstances, the rising was declared immediately in Koprivshtitsa. The April uprising had begun. The April uprising was the beginning of the birth of the modern Bulgarian state. The midwife was Russia. After the Koprivshtitsa declaration, a number of Cheti moved into Bulgaria, the most dramatic incident being when a band led by Hristo Botev seized an Austrian steamer on the Danube, and landed at the Bulgarian port of Lom. They marched southwards but were soon surrounded and destroyed. Many others died as the authorities suppressed the rising with relative ease. The April uprising suffered from a number of weaknesses. Coordination between local committees and those in exile was weak, particularly in the crucial years from 1872 to 1876, and when it was decided to act, the final preparations were too rushed, being completed in only 4 months. Help from Serbia, or anywhere outside the Bulgarian lands, failed to materialize. The Ottoman authorities had learned that a revolt was being considered, and from the late autumn of 1875 had taken appropriate measures, increasing their patrols on the Danube to prevent bands crossing from Romania, and also sending more spies and agents provocateurs into Bulgarian areas. These did considerable damage to the infrastructure of the revolutionary organization, and on the eve of the rising itself scores of activists, particularly teachers and priests, were arrested. The revolutionaries also wildly overestimated the degree of support they would receive from the population at large. Uzunov's optimism had been widely shared by those organizing the uprising in the Plovdiv area, who had expected more than 70,000 to join the revolt, but in the event throughout the Bulgarian lands no more than 10,000 took to arms. Hopes that the Chorbaji and Ottoman officials of Bulgarian extraction would rally to the rebel cause were also misplaced, and in Koprivshtitsa they even fed information on the uprising to the police. Those who did take up arms found that there were no carefully prepared plans or methods of communication between rebels and their immediate commanders, and links between the latter and the émigré organizations were as bad if not worse than before. The rebels were insufficiently armed. In the north they were affected by the refusal of boatmen to transport across the Danube weapons bought and stored in Romania, and although they famously fashioned some 40 cannons out of wood, these were useless in the military sense. The local leaders were equally lacking, initially at least, in military knowledge, both of strategy and of how to use what weapons were at their disposal. This meant that the rebels were no match for the Ottoman forces. Units of the regular army armed with artillery were deployed, as were groups of irregular bashabozuks who were also well armed. Nevertheless, whatever its weaknesses, the April uprising had shown to the outside world that there existed in Bulgaria a desire for political freedom for which many were prepared to sacrifice their lives. The rising was accompanied by appalling savagery. In some areas the revolutionaries attacked Muslims, thus provoking massive reprisals. The main instruments of these reprisals were not regular soldiers but local Circassians and bashabozuks, many of whom were Muslim Bulgarians. It was they who were mainly responsible for the terrible massacres in Bratsigovo, Pereshtitsa, and above all Batak, where 5,000 Bulgarian Christians, mostly women and children, were said to have been killed, many of them being herded into the local church and burned alive. The massacres revolutionized the Bulgarian Revolution. The revolutionaries had never anticipated such appalling events, but they had always intended to publicize their cause to the maximum degree. That way, the strategic reserve of the revolution, decisive Russian military intervention, might be brought into action. As Ignatiev had told the young revolutionary Stefan Stambolov in 1876, Russia cannot do anything for Bulgaria if the Bulgarians do not give us a reason to do so. The supporters of the rising were well aware of the need for and the value of publicity. When the rising began, there were three centers from which its supporters fed information to the outside world: Bucharest, Plovdiv, and Constantinople. To spread their message more widely, a number of Bulgarian newspapers published material in foreign languages, especially French and Romanian, whilst from Plovdiv Ivan Evstratiev Geshov sent material in English to the Times. The deputy commander of the Panegyrishte Revolutionary District, Todor Kableshkov, wrote during the April uprising, "It is not in the musket ball that I place my hope, but in the noise of its discharge, which surely must be heard in Europe, in fraternal Russia." The massacres ensured it was. If the massacres revolutionized the Bulgarian Revolution, they also Europeanized it. The horrors produced not only Gladstone's famous pamphlet but also an international conference in Constantinople at the end of 1876. The conference devised a series of reforms to ensure that such atrocities against the Christians of the Ottoman Empire would not happen again, but the Russians were not satisfied with the guarantees given for the implementation of the reforms, and in June 1877 declared war.